an awesome privilege to be here on the Builder stage. I know earlier today on the main stage there was a presentation about 32 hours a week, and I know that if you're in this room, likely you're somewhat like I was tasked in the SEALs to try and get 32 hours in every single day. So it's an absolute honor and privilege to be here, and I got clear guidance from the team that make sure that everything I talked about was completely results oriented. So I thought you might appreciate this slide, because it seems to be very similar to what you're experiencing, right? Entrepreneurship's living a few years of life like most people won't, so that you can spend the rest of your life like most people can't, right? And the goal of this presentation is to help you get the results that you want to get for your team, right? But results only come from one thing: action. Action comes from one thing: commitment. And those commitments come from one thing: the conversations that your team does or doesn't have are directly going to drive the results that you do or don't get. Right? And those conversations are really always in depth as the trust that you have. So the goal today is to show you, how do you drive that visionary leadership? How do you set the condition where you can lead innovation in your teams, right? Because you have highly qualified, just like I had SEALs that were very certain of their positions, right? And so how do you drive alignment and drive innovation in an increasingly competitive environment? So first we're going to talk about what are the 3 requirements for you as the innovative leader. It actually breaks down to 3 simple things. First, you have to see the world as it is. See things as they are, not better or worse, right? Means you have to set the conditions where you take responsibility for where your company currently is. The second is my favorite part about humans. We're the only creature on the entire planet that can look out into the future, create a vision, communicate it to others, and manifest it into reality, right? For see things how they can be, make a commitment. This is what I want to drive. And the reason you're here is because you're likely got the first 2 steps done, right? You have a vision for where you want to go. So today we're going to spend on the fun part, the third piece of that, which is make things as they see them, right? Drive that execution and drive it in a way that you can continue to do it without burning out. So for us, there are 3 requirements to drive execution of your vision, right? The first is you have to have periods of immersion. The reason I'm here at Collision, the reason I love this type of event is because you're working on the business, not in the business. You're taking time out to say, what are the other ideas that are out there? What are the other things that we could accomplish? What are the things that are the other possibilities, right? The second is episodic engagement. Anything can start in a moment, but often what happens? It flares off, right? So what's the episodic engagement? How often do you need to engage on that topic, whether it's a sports team that practices every day, an entrepreneurial team that focuses every single day on the problem they're trying to solve, or a SEAL team that's working on operations, right? And then the third is, of course, the culture of support. Because every one of you has amazing capabilities, but none of you as this individual can accomplish the amazing things you can accomplish inside of a team. None of you can get the innovation from one person that you can get if you get complete innovation from all your team. So let's play with this. Let's talk about periods of immersion. So of course, picture in free fall, which my body and most bodies are not naturally designed to fly, right? And so you're immersed in a completely new environment, right? What is that period of immersion, right? It's an intense period of time, and the moment you jump out of an aircraft, I guarantee it's absolutely an intense period of time where an individual team or an organization is pulled from their usual operating environment and thrust into a new one. Because the moment you go into a new environment, you start to learn at an asymmetric rate. The first time I jumped out of an airplane, all I saw was my altimeter spinning faster and faster and faster. Now the 10th jump, I actually saw that there were other jumpers in the sky. The 15th jump, I actually saw the ground, right? Because you start to get used to that new environment. When you go in that immersive environment, take your team into a place where, hey, this is what we're going to create. At first it's going to feel awkward, it's going to feel impossible, but then you can set the conditions where that becomes the new norm, right? Let's go into water. Water is, none of us have gills that we've yet evolved. No one's innovated that component. So we go into water and do drown proofing. It sets the conditions by doing very simple skills like knot tying, very simple skills like untying your breathing apparatus underwater. It sets the conditions where over time you build to where you can do very complex operations. You can sneak up into denied areas, just like you saw in the last brief. You can do what no one else thought you can do because you constantly build up that component. Take that into the startup world. One of my heroes is Mark Benioff. Before he started Salesforce, he went to 6 straight Unleash the Power Within events with Tony Robbins, right? And this picture here is a fire walk. So each individual walks across 2,000 degree coals, and he did that multiple times. Why? Because he's imbuing in himself, I'm going to do the impossible. I'm going to go into a competitive space and do what no one else did. He then followed that up by founding Salesforce, and he didn't stop there, right? He continued to cycle back with those periods of immersion and go in through the fire walk to the point where I've been to a couple of events, and he's also invited here, Tony Robbins. He brings his entire team to those type of events now to set the conditions where that entire culture goes through those periods of immersion. The entire culture sees that. And of course, you've seen the tremendous results that came off of everything they've driven there. So that's periods of immersion. Let's dive into episodic engagement, right? So you have to get the work done, right? You do the period of immersion where you come out and work on the business, and then how often do you need to do an engagement to maintain that habit, right? One of my favorite books, The Power of Habit, they talk about the myelin sheathing, right? The sheathing around our neurotransmitters, that when you start to build a habit, things start to happen automatically, right? And we all have a certain amount of willpower. One of my favorite studies involved chocolate chip cookies, my favorite, and radishes. And they talked about there were two groups of children. One group had to eat the radishes and not the chocolate chip cookies, and one group got to eat the chocolate chip cookies and not the radishes, i.e. one group used their willpower, the other group did not. And it set the conditions that when they later took a computer test for resiliency, the children that had to eat the radishes and not the cookies had used up a lot of their willpower, and so they no longer had the capacity to make the best decisions, right? So everything we want to drive is we want to set the habits inside of your company so that everything that could be easy is on autopilot, so we can save your team's resilience for the long haul. In the SEALs, we did that by running with a boat on our head. Now I can tell you, I've never run with a boat on my head during an operation. That's not the goal. The goal of that was to set the conditions where you got used to a habit of having to work as a team. Because no one could lift the boat by themselves, or else your neck would be like this, right? And you'll see suspect number 6 here in the back, the guy that's head's not under the boat, eventually his team will eliminate him from the team because they can't lift with that extra load, right? So you set the conditions where all of the exercises you do as a team puts in play the very habits that you want to form. Now that's on the team level. On the individual level, it also helps. Because running with the boat on your head, you set the conditions where I can always take one more step. It's completely miserable, but I can always take one more step. But the moment you have a mental fissure, the moment you question whether you can do it or not, is the moment that you can no longer perform. It's the moment that you quit. And that's where we had an evolution called Steel Pier, where they said, hey, we're going to Steel Pier, and we turned the corner, and all of a sudden the boat got heavy, and 2 people quit that instant. Because the moment they had that mental fissure is the moment that they didn't believe and the moment that they quit. So let's take that into your world, into the startup world. One of the most amazing innovations that I love is the stand-up, where every single day your team gets together and you align and say, this is what's most important for each individual in the team. Because as you've seen, there's only one moment you have complete alignment, right? The moment an entrepreneur has an idea, you have complete alignment. It's the best idea ever. But the moment you start building a team, you start to have different visions. And the different visions are those very things that are going to take that initial innovation and are going to allow that to continue to grow and expand and adapt to the environment in ways that you could never have anticipated as an individual. And the stand-up sets the conditions where you also don't have redundancy, right? The last thing you have time for in a resource-constrained environment is to have people working in multiple different directions, right? You're better at math than I. When the vectors are pointed in different directions, the magnitude of it's very small. We've been part of the teams where they're pulling the opposite directions and they actually go nowhere. So once we've got our immersion or episodic engagement, we're really talking about now let's take that culture of support. Let's take that culture or that environment where now, to make the change stick, you set the condition where every individual shares hardship. They make their efforts and build muscle memory to make it a habit. So here you've got SEALs doing, crawling towards their instructor. And the whole goal is to get complete alignment. And you get to the point where as you get to scale your company quickly from 5 to 15 to 30, the fun piece is you can set the conditions where now people roll in as a new team member and they instantly assimilate to that new culture. And they assimilate to the new culture because all human beings are very simple. We all want 3 things. So those 3 things we all want are this. We want to be seen, right? We want to be accounted for. We want our impact to make a difference. Second thing we all want is we want to be heard. We want to be able to contribute. And the third thing, we want to be understood. We want to be acknowledged for our presence. And so if you can set the conditions where you've got these 3 things, that sets the conditions where your people will not only have a job where they're giving you the transactional part of themselves or 10% of who they are, but instead they're giving you their entire soul, right? Every human being, from my perspective, wants to be a part of something larger than themselves. And when you set the conditions where you provide a context for them to have this, they will give you every innovation, every idea they've ever designed. And when you get all those combined innovations, that's what we call the Star Wars bar, right? The SEALs were at our worst when the entire room was full of SEALs. Because when you open your toolbox and you had a hammer, the whole world looked like nails. When we got awesome was when we had intelligence officers, helicopter pilots, State Department officers, all the different components, the Star Wars bar, the big ears, the long nose, because when you had that diversity is when you got innovation that was off the charts. And that's the conditions where we really were able to move. So next I'm going to talk about how do you drive that communication. In the SEALs, the default mode that we used to communicate by was, you screwed that up, right? And with that kind of communication, it sets the conditions where what happens? Instantly, I'm defensive, and so I'm going to stop giving ideas, I'm going to stop giving innovation. It also sets the conditions where it stops communication. And when you stop communication, as you all know, you stop the innovation. So our model is what we call a fierce dialogue, is committed speaking. We start off with what I see is. What I see is this project isn't on target. What I see is we're not where we need to be. It's just an observation, it's a fact. And then you say, my thinking about this, my thinking is, if we stay behind target, we may not have enough revenue in our funding line to get to our objective. My feeling is that makes me very nervous, and so my request is that we find a way to focus our energy to solve this problem. And it sounds like it's complex and it's going to take a long time, but what that does, it sets the conditions where in 30 seconds, you just went from a complaint, which makes someone defensive, to a request, which calls them to their highest and utmost. And the reason this is powerful is because if you state your request, people know, do you want me to shut the project down? Do you want me to innovate in the project faster? And it also sets the conditions where you can focus the leadership of the company on the hardest problems the organization has to solve. Now you may think that committed speaking is a little bit more challenging, but I'm going to show you the part that's really challenging. Committed listening. Because as SEALs and as entrepreneurs, we tend to be very assured of ourselves, and we tend to be completely clear that we have the best insight and the best innovation possible. So committed listening, we're going to have active awareness. With active awareness, we're going to completely acknowledge and validate. Now this is the hardest part specifically. I used to have a communication style with my wife where I would come home, she would complain, I would take that as an attack. As a SEAL, I attacked back. I crushed the enemy, she cried, and I was a jerk. It was a very clear pattern that we used to have, right? And that often happens in teams, and that absolutely destroys innovation, because that's when that person goes, hey, I'm going to give you everything. So they go, hey, I'm not going to give you anything. I'm going to give you exactly what I have to give you to not get fired. And all of a sudden, your competition's faster than you because you go from one step ahead to one step behind. So acknowledge and validate. Does that mean you take on everything from their response? Absolutely not. You own what you can. I understand that this project is behind. You're correct, right? You can set the conditions where the part you own. Critical piece, T, the tolerance, right? I'm going to respect multiple realities. And this is the interactive portion of our brief. So I'd like everyone to take their index finger and move it around in a counterclockwise direction. Counterclockwise right there at your waist level. All right, and I'd like you to then slowly raise it, keep spinning it over your head. Okay, so this half of the room, I want you to put your finger back down below your waist. Now, what direction is your finger turning? Still counterclockwise, right? What about over here when it's above your head? What direction? Clockwise? Right? Most conflict in teams come from exactly that. You're both absolutely right, and you could fight for days that it's clockwise or counterclockwise. The truth is you're both right, and if you take the time to understand the other person's reality, you can set the conditions where you can explore it and understand it and gain alignment and possibility, which is really what you want for innovation, which is why the third step is understanding. The instant I say, oh, I got it, you're looking at it from below, I'm looking at it from above, you can now set the conditions by asking questions and suspending judgment, which my default mode would have been, you're wrong, it's absolutely counterclockwise, or you're wrong, it's absolutely clockwise. By suspending judgment, you create the space to step into the future. Most people, innovation dies because they spend their entire lives looking at the past. That tiny sliver of things that would represent the past, that's the things that we know. Some spend a little bit of time in the present, which is the things we don't know, right? The immediate challenges you have. What I'm asking you to do is step into that place of possibility of the things you don't know. That huge swath of possibility in the future that allows you to take uncertainty and capitalize on it. And the only way you can do that is to have non-defensiveness. Right? Non-defensive means I'm going to be open to influence. if I'm convinced, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. So the instant that I'm convinced of my position, then there can be no other input, and the organization now has a brilliance of one. Right? The moment that you pull the entire team in, all of a sudden you have the entire breadth of that team, and if you've set the conditions right, you also have access to their entire network. And that's where in an ever-increasing and changing environment, you get increasing capability to change. And the final piece, of course, empathy. Right? Taking genuine interest in the people and being fully present. In the SEALs, we have what's called phase 1 and phase 2, and that's one of the secrets to innovation for us. In phase 1, it's everyone's responsibility to take off the rank, take off their position, and provide the greatest possible context for what they think the best solution is. So before an operation, somebody'd want to take kayaks, somebody'd want to take a helicopter, somebody'd want a parachute, somebody might want to take a submarine. You'd have a variety of different inputs. And if everybody felt like they were a part of their process and they acknowledged, the moment that phase 2 came, the moment that you as the leader came and said, this is the direction we're going to go, from that moment on, there was complete unity because everyone felt like they had input to the process, and once they'd input, they had ownership of it, which set the conditions where everyone is involved, even though, of course, you can't go everywhere, every direction in a resource-constrained, or in our case, a time-constrained environment. This picture should be common to everyone. This is, of course, World Cup last year, right? Germany had the huge upset against Brazil on their home turf. Why? Was it because they had great talent? It's a component of it, but everyone in the event had great talent. The thing that we thought was amazing as we look back on that was that this is the resort that was built for the Germans and that was put into construction 4 years before the World Cup. It was designed with the exact same principles that Tony Hsieh's using to build the downtown, and the reason that we've come together here at the Collision. It had one area for eating. It had one area for recreation. And the reason they designed it that way is they wanted to set the condition where the team members would all come together on myriads of different environments. When they were relaxing, they were together. When they were playing, they were together. And it set the conditions where they built relationships that were much more in depth than the relationships that the other teams had. Most organizations, they stick together and everything's fine when it's smooth sailing. Where do things fall apart? As soon as a crisis hits, those relationships that were okay were really superficial relationships that tear apart the very moment that you need them. And by putting the infrastructure in place where they could now unite in a depth that was more crucial is what we believe is a crucial component of what kept them together as a team. So really what we're talking about is doing the basics. I love this quote from Steve Jobs on computers. It also applies amazingly well to humans. Very simple-minded instructions, very simple-minded habits, very simple-minded processes that when you put it together with not just one person, but instead 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, all of a sudden the results appear to be magic. Everyone's been a part of a great team at some point in their life. And often if you ask them, what was that like? They'll say, it was magical. Yes, how do you recreate that? And they say, I have no idea. Our goal is to set the conditions where you can demystify that and you can create that magical environment in every single team that you lead. So what does that look like over time? If you said, okay, Curt, great, what do I do when I get home? If you take your team and take that top line, there's those periods of immersion, right? You take your team on whatever basis you want. It could be quarterly basis. If you want to iterate faster, it could be a monthly basis. Or with the stand-up, you could almost do it on a daily basis. We would do it in a variety of different timelines. If we had a crisis, we sometimes opened the virtual teleconferences around the world for 48 hours straight. If it was something we want to accomplish over a decade, we'd meet once a year. So that's your determination, but those periods of immersion, right? When you go and create that reality, you're going to decide, okay, now what do we need to do to focus on? What do we need to episodically focus on every single day here at the tactical level? What are those updates that we're going to do that I'm going to continuously understand? Because where focus goes, energy flows. The fun thing about you as the key leaders in the organization, whatever you touch gets better. You have the Midas touch. The real question is, what are you touching and what are you not touching? Typically, when we work with startups to multinationals, the things that don't move forward are the things that the key leaders don't touch. Right? And the third component, by keeping those teams together, you can set that culture of support that allows you to do the impossible. Because really, it's what we've talked about today is just a series of simple steps, right? Building the relationships, doing those periods of immersion, driving all these little point pieces that are all simple in and of themselves. Where over time, what we want you to be is we want you to be the unbeatable team. We want you to be the unbeatable team that has never-ending innovation which means every single day when your competition iterates, every single day when the rest of the world iterates, you're iterating faster. We want your half-life to be just faster so that you're always the first one to the step, you're always the first one off the block. So I want to thank so much for your time today. If you want anything else, what I have is I've got a link here for that fierce dialogue method I showed you. If you click on this link, we'll give you the entire handout on how we do that. And with just the time left, I'd like to take a few moments for questions.
Up for questions, hands up for
Question.
I think they're all
It's kind of hard to tell if people have questions or are busy just taking photographs.
Yeah, I'm
Put
just
the
gonna-
phones down, put your
I'm
hands
gonna
up for a
take
question.
Phones down, hands up.
Oh, there we go.
Right over here.
Back.
All right. I have no idea how I'm getting to you. All right.
Throw the microphone.
Excuse me.
Crowd surf.
Yeah, so when you're right here. So when you're working with teams on this kind of structure, what are the things that you think that people are the most common mistake in trying to build cultures that have this very team mentality? What's the biggest mistake that you see over and over again that they're of all those pieces you have running there?
Absolutely. The biggest mistake people have is the inverse of that. When they say they assume that they're right and they're the only one with a good idea, it completely destroys teams. Because you can have a team of very talented individuals, and the instant that they feel like they are never going to be listened to or none of their ideas have value, all those die in the back of their head. They go, it's not going to have value here. And you get a bunch of lemmings that sit and go, what do we do now? And that sets the conditions where you've absolutely destroyed the team. You've lost complete engagement. And now that they're less engaged, they'll spend less time. They'll spend less energy. They'll have be less, in general, they won't take that little bit extra that makes extra to extraordinary. And so that's the number one, is the engaging in the ego and saying the conditions that you shut everybody else down. Absolutely, by far.
PJ, I think we have another question over here. And there's another one behind you.
Getting my workout today.
Hi, thank you. I'm building a company on mindfulness and bringing mindfulness to the offices, and I'm wondering if that's something you introduce relaxation and mindfulness techniques into team building when you're working, or have you looked at it in the past?
Say it once more. Say it.
Whether you've looked at mindfulness techniques and relaxation techniques with the team building in your line of work.
Which techniques?
Meditation, mindfulness, relaxation.
Absolutely. It's a huge component. It's one of the things that was revolutionary for me. When I first had a coach told me, hey, Curt, you need to meditate more. I said, do you know how busy I am? I don't even have time to sit and talk to myself. And so it took me a little bit to come around to it. But the meditation component is a huge piece for the leader to be centered and to get out of their own ego. For me, whenever I meditate more, I'm more open. All of the things I talked about in attunement, I have much more empathy for others' positions. I have much more open to influence, and I'm much more open to different perspectives. And I think it's absolutely one of the most overlooked components, because really what it helps you to get from the level of consciousness in the by me phase, where it has to be by me, to give up control and get to the through me phase, where now I'm copper wire. I'm not absorbed in the transaction, and that's what gives a leader, as you go from a 10 to 15 to 25 person company, the ability to scale and delegate tasks to the point you can scale infinitely. So it's a huge component.
Hi, this way, left, right, yeah, there. Hi.
Sir.
Do you have like a specific, well, I can't say a list, but I know a resource for actual tools that people could use to achieve, well, these kind of values in terms of culture for, let's say, a creative agency? Like, you know, how do you create, do you have like an online resource or?
Absolutely. Well, first, the Fierce Dialogue one that I talked about is the tool we use for teams where we have the missing conversations to be able to light up those conversations. And then you can also, on our website, contact me and I'll provide you any or all of those. That's our passion. Absolutely.
Hi, thanks.
Sure.
A lot of companies, big and small now, are increasingly having more distributed teams working remotely. A lot of people feel that culture is virtually impossible to build throughout a distributed team. How do you feel about that?
I think it's absolutely possible. It is absolutely more challenging. And so, but it's absolutely more rich as well. I mean, for us, when in the Joint Special Operations community, when we got really good was when we had task forces that were operating 24 hours a day across 24 different countries. And the key is setting the conditions where they come together. We had to find what's the periodicity. For us, it was every quarter we came together as a team and connected with each other on a deeply personal level. And then we had the episodic engagement we used was virtual teleconferences. where every single day or weekly or whatever was required, you would be able to engage, and that was increased the human touch. It set the conditions where now we could see each other and you could converse and see much more. And that's why we spent so much money on bandwidth, because when there was bad communications, cooperation also broke down. So the key was setting the conditions where you have from in-person, which is high touch, high investment, to virtual teleconference, which is higher touch but not as much, but less investment. People don't have to fly, to phone conversations, to email, down to broadcast email. And so it's finding that right mixture. And usually, if the teams aren't coming together, there's not enough of a connective tissue touch. And I would say they can't meet everyone, but if you get the key leader together and then they get their team together and they convey their trust, then that instantly conveys across the entire organization. It's the instant that you start to see that divisiveness that, oh, I don't trust that guy, and so the debrief is different. That's why it's so crucial that the senior leaders are aligned. If they come out with one truth, the entire team thinks they're one truth. We see in global organizations, they say, hey, I don't like whatever my organization X is. What they really mean is, I'm struggling with my immediate supervisor. And so it's always only one layer deep. So the critical piece is making sure you have strength at that critical, what we call the catalytic leader realm, right? Where your country team lead or your regional lead or whatever that is has got to be strong, because that's going to be the representation of that entire region. And that's why you'll typically see 3 or 4 rock star regions, and one that's off. It's not because the structure doesn't work, it's because that leader's not conveying the message. But it's the most innovative advantage you can have, because now you have multiple different contexts. You see the world from 25 different perspectives, because the whole goal is to get feedback from the lowest level up to the senior leaders to make better decisions. And now you're getting not only one facet of one country, but you're getting multiple facets. And it's the most powerful way to do it, but it requires a level of discipline that's more extreme. Sir.
So in the case where you've underinvested in a team, what's the first thing you do to get back on track if you haven't made that investment properly? So
what I hear is the standard that you allow as a leader is typically the one that the one you accept is the one you set, right? So the instant that I allowed someone, I did this on one of my teams, I had a non-performer and I separated them from the rest of my 25 guys, but the fact that they existed set the conditions where I incentivized all 25 other people not to perform. So the first is set the new standard. Set the conditions where that's not acceptable. And most people think you're going to have to fire the entire team. Typically, the moment that that's not acceptable, everyone else rises to that level. So that's the first piece, is make it clear that that's no longer acceptable. The second piece is get people connected. Find the venue like a collision or whatever it's going to be. Get people together and get them to talk and related to each other. Because what happens is we start to assume malintent, right? You can tell almost instantly when you go into an organization whether they're going to succeed or fail without any knowledge of their industry. If they're focusing on the obstacles, they will focus on those that will make them huge and they will become insurmountable. If they're focusing on the possibility, no matter how slight, they'll find a way there. So get the people together to relate. For us, we get people together and have them talk about what are some decisions that shaped your life? Who are the people that most influenced you? And the instant that people start talking about that, they take off their professional masks and they're authentic with each other. The problem is, if I have my mask as a leader and they have their mask as this position, they're trying to engage each other, but they're not really engaging the true person, and so you never really connect. So the minute that you get those true connections, you can completely transform the possibility. And you'll create possibility in a moment. The challenge is then you've got to set the episodic component to make that a habit, because people go, wow, the standard is different. But if right afterward it goes back to the same low standard, now it's actually worse because they're now resigned that nothing works, right? It's boom, and then hold that as high, because there is no point guidance anymore, right? You can't say do something and go. People are going to react off of all the data points you set up. And so when you reset the standard, the instant that they see, oh, for the last 3 months it's better, they'll totally engage in that because they want something awesome. If you say, hey, I want our team to be 32nd, nobody gets excited, right? But the instant you give them that BHAG, that big, hairy, audacious goal, then everybody wants to rise to that. And as soon as you give them the possibility to believe, it's go time.
Okay, we have to leave it there.
Awesome.
If you could give Curt a round of applause, please.
Thanks, Eamon.